Welcome to this edition of UpFront, a monthly program produced by New Hanover County Schools. I'm your host, Ann David. Each month here on UpFront, Superintendent of Schools Dr. Tim Markley answers direct questions from you, the public, about district-wide issues, accomplishments, and programs. This month on the show, we'll be talking with Mr. Bill Trant, Executive Director for Special Education and Related Services. He'll join us later in the show to discuss the issues and challenges of working with special needs population. But first, we'd like to welcome Dr. Markley to the show to answer questions from you. Welcome, Dr. Markley.
Good morning, Ann.
Our first question is good news. It's about a Marine Sciences Academy at Ashley. Tell us a little bit about that. And the questions from parents, of course, is are we going to have more academies like this at the other high schools?
All right, let's take the first part of that, marine science. It's a program that they want to put together that focuses on marine science and in partnership with the community college and with UNCW. They're recruiting for it right now, so if it's something you've got an interest in, please call over to Ashley, speak to their the administration or the counselors folks over there, and they can help you. And it'll be open to students across the district. They would have to transfer to Ashley for their junior and senior year. If perchance since it's so late, if we don't get it enough to start this year, then we'll just do a little more planning and we'll roll it back out next year. And this is part of a larger attempt to sort of broaden and make some real specific focuses at each one of our high schools. And at New Hanover we have Lyceum, which is another kind of very intense focus program. And so I'm working with my other two schools to develop a focus program for each of them that could attract students to those schools as well.
So it will be open to students countywide.
Countywide.
And do they need to contact the school directly, like Ashley? Would they need to contact them directly?
Yes, contact the school directly.
And they'll tell them, oh, well, from what you said, they will actually have to transfer to that school for their junior and senior year.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. That's a big new program.
Yep. I know that Laney is meeting to talk about what they would like to do as a focus program, and then once we have a permanent principal over at Hoggard, we'll sit down with that staff and have a discussion about where they'd like to go in terms of a focus program.
Well, that's wonderful news. The next question, I'm sure everyone watches the television about our legislators, both in Washington and in Raleigh. What do you see as the state legislators return, the changes that they're going to provide to our school system this year?
It is going to be an interesting year to watch the legislature. Budget-wise, I anticipate probably a hold-the-line kind of budget, not much more than we got last year, maybe a little bit of an increase, so I don't expect a huge change there. Where you're going to see a lot of change, I think, in the legislature this year are some of the behind-the-scenes kinds of way we do things. There's some talk about consolidating how they fund schools from multiple budget categories down to about a dozen funding categories. Some that really concern me, there's discussion around teacher tenure. There are some discussions around vouchers, which is probably the one that concerns me the most. The idea of taking public school money and allowing it to be used in private school. I'm waiting to see what those bills look like before we comment on what those will look like. There's calendar bills that are out there, lots of things around school safety because of Sandy Hook. So it's still early in the session. Maybe as we get into next month, we can talk a little bit about more about which of those bills look like they're going to come through. But teacher tenure, grading of schools, and vouchers are three that I think we're going to probably see some kind of action on.
Yeah, that's important for parents. They need to stay involved and stay on top of things and also contact their legislators if they're for or against any of those measures. Mm-hmm. Spinning off of that, you mentioned the budget. I know that there is a budget presented to the Board of Education. Can you kind of give us some ideas of what that looks like and what we're expecting as far as that goes?
Yeah. We presented our initial budget to the board at our last board meeting, and then we'll have, at our work session coming up, we'll do a little more in-depth discussion for them of questions that they have about that. And that budget primarily focuses on what we're asking the county commissioners for and sort of it looks at what we think the state's going to do. As I told the board, this year's budget is really more of a restoration budget to get us back to where we were. When we went through the downturn a few years ago, we had to cut teacher supplements and supplements for other folks. We want to restore those supplements and sort of put them back to where they were. So then in the next year after that, we can look at restoring some positions. If you look at our per pupil, it's gone down every year for the last 4 years. And so I'd like to stop that trend and start to reverse that. So the big things on this year's budget really focus on getting our employees back to where they were. But even if we restored the cut 1% supplement for everybody, with the increased cost and the increased health costs, they're still barely going to be breaking even as to where they were several years ago. Because the state did a 1.2% last year, and that was the first raise they had done in 4 years. So it's not a huge increase for teachers, and in some respects it just balances out some of the other areas that they're having to put more out of pocket.
Well, I know that parents and teachers will be glad to hear that news, so we'll keep an eye on that too as it progresses. Now, we'll be right back, joined by Bill Trant, Executive Director for the School System's Special Education and Related Services Department. He'll share with us the details on the challenges of his department and how it works in providing a safe and quality education for students with disabilities. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. It takes a man to be a dad.
Welcome back to UpFront with the Superintendent. This month on UpFront, we're taking an up-close look at special education and related services in New Hanover County School System. Joining us this month is Mr. Bill Trant, the department's Executive Director. Welcome to the show, Mr. Trant.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm glad to have you. We've had a lot of questions from parents about this area. So the superintendent wanted to have you here to kind of help parents figure out things and understand what they need for their children. Before we get going, how about telling the parents a little bit about yourself, how long you've been working for New Hanover County Schools, and how you got interested in children with learning disabilities?
I've been working with New Hanover County Schools in my current position since 1995, which in June will be 18 years. It seems like a very short period of time, actually. I began working in the field of special education and serving students with disabilities after I graduated from college. And I really was not sure what I wanted to do with my life at that time, as many young people are. And I got a part-time job driving a special education school bus. I got very interested in the children and the services around them, so I kind of said, I think I want to pursue this. And so it's kind of a bootstrap story in a way, but from there I went to be a teacher assistant and then became a teacher and then had opportunities in administration. So I've really enjoyed the opportunities that have come my way in this field. It's really rewarding work.
I'm sure you've seen tremendous change over the years in special education and students with learning disabilities.
Absolutely. The services for students with disabilities have just gotten stronger and stronger across our country. I've worked in several different states in the United States, and early in my career there was this landmark federal law that was passed called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It had a different name at the time, but that's the current name. And it brought so many children that were not even allowed to go to school into the public schools. It really put into play a concept called zero reject, which means every child, regardless of their needs, has an opportunity to be educated. And that just kind of opened the door to all sorts of possibilities and interesting things that have developed since then. And that was 1975 that occurred.
Well, tell us a little bit about what New Hanover County Schools do for these students to help them receive all they need to succeed.
Well, one of I mentioned earlier this law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it's the North Carolina General Statutes has similar laws in it, but we refer to it as the IDEA. So that might slip into my conversation from time to time, so I thought I'd try to define that a little bit.
That's good, because a lot of parents hear all these acronyms for different things and are not quite sure what it means, so that's always good to...
My field is particularly loaded with them, so I try to avoid them and explain them, but if I slip up, please don't hesitate to call me on it. But anyway, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has a very affirmative responsibility on the part of every school system in the United States to perform an act they call Child Find, or that's called Child Find, and it's a duty to locate, identify, and evaluate students who may have special needs or may have disabilities, And so that's kind of how the process starts. And there's so many different ways that begins, because the school system's responsibility to students who may have disabilities and then who do have disabilities actually begins at age 3 and extends all the way until their 22nd birthday. So there's a span of time that exceeds traditional schooling, if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The law also contains a birth to 3 component for students with disabilities who may be identified in the neonatal unit when they're born. It's a very strong approach early on with children. And the Birth to 3 program, though, is not operated by the New Hanover County Schools. That's operated by, in North Carolina, by an agency called the Child Development Service Agency.
So parents don't, are parents your primary source of knowing that children have these needs, or does the school system have other ways of finding out?
There's lots of ways, and parents, of course, are a primary provider of information or expressing a need. But it can come from pediatricians when they're young, or even early ages of school. Community members, like the health department has programs that work with children when they're young to intervene and help with developmental concerns. We may get referrals from them. Once children enter schools, like if they enter any of our preschool programs or enter kindergarten, teachers and others who work with children observe them and may see a need for addressing their needs in a way that's different from what we would typically provide for children.
Are there any testing components particularly that are in place that help teachers recognize students in need?
Yes, that's something that's really changed a lot in the last 5 to 6 years. In the past, the system of identifying children that may need additional support or who may need special education services typically was based on a referral. Somebody would refer someone, and then there would be an assessment process that would occur. What's happened recently, though, is that school systems have put in, not just for needy kids, but all kids, assessment systems to identify who's progressing and who's moving forward. So, like for example, when children enter kindergarten, there's a set of assessments that are given to every child. And so teachers have information that helps them to provide instruction a little differently to some children, or more intensely when the data suggests that they may need this. Rather than waiting for a referral or there's a need, they're looking at actual performance information, which is called curriculum-based measures, early on to determine who may need extra help immediately. My field used to be, the whole area of special education often was accused of being a wait-to-fail system. And it was based on, because of the standards, a lot of times children qualify for services unless they were really significantly disabled until 3rd or 4th grade, and a lot of times that was very late. So with these earlier measurement systems and intervention systems, we can use that kind of information to make a determination if a child needs special education or not. And also get them services prior to making a determination of that need, because lots of children will get these interventions early on and not need the more intensive special education services because they get the help right away, rather than waiting to fail.
And that's really important, because if you wait till 3rd grade, they're heading right into the end of grade testing for the first time. And that is too late to find out that they need things. So the way the county is operating, they are catching them before they start kindergarten to know
Absolutely.
if they need directed help.
Yes.
And that's probably very important also, because with the end of grade testing and with the requirements, I guess both federal and state, the schools are held to some high accountability.
Yes.
So how are they working in other ways to accomplish making that accountability for these students to achieve?
When you're referring to students with disabilities, the accountability systems that look at performance of districts and schools assess children with disabilities just like everybody else. I mean, the assessment systems assess everyone. There's not an exemption. If you're a 3rd grader and you are a person with a disability or not, you get assessed. There's not, there used to be an exemption system, and that's no longer the case. And then there's public reporting that accompanies school accountability and district accountability processes. that includes how students with disabilities perform on these assessments, just like those other groups are looked at too, like boys and girls, or different ethnic groups, or poor children, and different kinds of term is disaggregation of the assessment information to kind of look at what groups might need more attention or assistance, and are we progressing? Are children getting better as a result of the instruction that we're providing them?
That's true, because on integrated tests, they are a category just like race or anything.
Yes, yes, that's what I was
they're
trying to say. That I guess I
Yeah.
didn't say it as clearly as I should.
But that's, I mean, I know parents see that when they look at the report cards, so they are considered a category. So the special attention is being given to them to be sure that they succeed and meet those requirements as well. An important thing is that not all children are in classes for learning disabled children. Some are in just regular classes. Are the teachers, the regularly licensed teachers, receiving any additional training on how to help children learn on all levels?
Yes, I think in particular at the early grades, the system that I referred to earlier that assesses children 3 times a year in K for 1 and 2. And more frequently if there are children that are not doing as well. Also includes strategies for teachers to use to help them. If children, the system also includes ways in which we kind of measure progress using a concept in statistics called an aim line. So if a child continues to fall below an aim line for a period of time after efforts have been made to change what we're doing to bring them above or even with the aim line, those kinds of data can be used to take the next step in the process, which we were talking about earlier in Child Find, which is to conduct an assessment to determine whether or not a child has a special need and that special need requires special education. These data, these curriculum-based measures are probably the strongest kind of information about how well a child does in school and what they need to be able to be successful in school. But that can be supplemented. The assessment system that were required under that Child Find that I mentioned earlier can include other kinds of assessments too that are, what they call norm reference standardized tests, which are typically administered in an individual way to children that would be supplemented and looked at in regard to how the curriculum-based measures occur. And there's a whole other group of children. I mean, we're kind of talking in the area of children that are mildly disabled, because they make up about probably 3/4 of the 3,000 children or so that the New Hanover County School serves. There's a group of youngsters that maybe make up about 25% of the children that have what we call an individualized education program, an acronym IEP.
And I'm sure parents, they've heard that quite frequently.
That's a very
yes.
common one, yeah.
Yes.
That's kind of like, almost like the IRS.
Yes.
We're familiar with those. Some acronyms they are known to us. Anyway, but these groups of youngsters, there's a number of what we would call more low incidence but significant disabilities, like children who are blind and deaf, and children who are both blind and deaf, and children who have autism, and children with serious cognitive impairments, serious physical disabilities. These are the children that were typically excluded from school prior to the law that I mentioned earlier. And they're a part of our school too, and they're students in our school and participate just like other children in the schools. And that's a group of children that requires lots of alternative ways to serve them, alternative ways to teach them, and so forth. So, but at the same time, trying to give them as typical an experience as other children. Yeah. And that's really different work from what schools ordinarily do in their work, but it's just as important and just as significant.
Can you give any suggestions to parents that are concerned maybe their child has not been identified yet, but where they need to start to be sure that they receive the services they need to help them learn at the best they can?
Yes. Well, every school has a team that looks at this data that I'm talking about, where the children are, and the data that I'm talking about is very precise. It says what skills the groups of children may or may not have, and that we have 5 children in this grade that need this. Let's give that to them. And then there's a committee that looks at this data and will make decisions about what kind of additional assessments are needed. So for a parent, the idea would be to ask for talk to the principal or administration or even this child's teacher and say, I would like to make a request for the school system to convene a meeting. Sometimes they're called student support team meetings primarily, but schools have different names for these committees, so I didn't want to give like one name. There's a committee that meets at every school. Every school has this committee. It's composed of teachers and other experts in the areas of reading, math, and school behavior, because that's another issue that is important for schools to address. And they will look in a more deliberate way at the information and write a plan for an individual student, typically called an intervention plan, that will be even more precise in its the skills that will be addressed and the measures that will be used to determine if this is successful or not. And these data for children that are more typical but have some special needs will be used to determine whether they need long-term intervention, which is what I would call an IEP, or which is called an IEP. It's not just me calling it that. Right. It's what the law calls it. So I guess the short answer to my long response is for parents to speak to someone at the school, the child's teacher, principal, or others, and say, I would like to do you have a student support team or something equivalent, and can we have a meeting about my child because I'm concerned?
Well, that's wonderful information. We certainly appreciate you coming. We have so many more questions, so we may have you back again.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I'd love to come back.
So many parents have questions and concerns as this area changes daily, it seems. So we certainly appreciate you coming. Thank you. Now don't go away. We've got more questions for Dr. Markley. And if you have a question you want the superintendent to answer about our school system, we've got the information for you right now. So get out a pen and paper and jot down these details.
If you would like to have your questions about issues relating to our school system answered by Dr. Markley, then visit our school system's website at www.nhcs.net and click on the Parent tab, and then click on the Superintendent on the left side of the screen. There you will find a submission form for your questions. You can also send your questions by mail to New Hanover County Schools, attention UpFront, 6410 Carolina Beach Road, Wilmington, North Carolina, 28412.
When I was out there using drugs, I felt so alone. You stuck by me, and through those times on the streets, it's like you still accepted me even though I was doing all these things, and it's priceless to me, and I'll never forget it. I don't know what I would have done without you, Mom. I don't know. You know, I could have died out there, but I'm so glad that I made it out of that, and I'm back to who I really am.
Welcome back for our final segment here on UpFront. We've got a few more questions for Dr. Markley before we go. Dr. Markley, I know we are growing again as a school system. Can you tell us about some of those growing pains and where it's taking us?
Yeah, when you look at our growth last year, we exceeded state projections, and we're over 25,000 students. That's not even counting our pre-K programs, and we're going to probably continue to grow 3, 4, 5% the next several years to a point where very shortly we'll be over 27,000 students. A lot of that growth is in the south end of the county. A lot of that growth is on the east side of the county, ocean side obviously. We're starting to see some in Castle Hayne, and as they build out infrastructure into Castle Hayne, I think you'll see that growth continue. So we're seeing growth, and it's not isolated in one part of the county. So we need at least 2 new elementary schools, some major renovations and replacements of other schools, and it leads into the whole discussion about bond that we're working with the county commissioners on.
Absolutely. I know as a result of the Sandy Hook incident, some parents are worried about some of the elementary schools with the doors open to the outside. I guess that all circles around bond.
That circles back to the bonds. You look at our College Park, which has multiple buildings, multiple entrances and exits. Blair and Pine Valley, schools that have all of their classroom doors opening outside. Good buildings when they were designed, but not really designed for a 21st century environment.
Absolutely. Well, our next question as a result from that, and many parents have called in about this, is the increased safety as a result of the incident at Sandy Hook. You know, we heard so much when it first happened. Can you kind of give us an update on what has changed and what is projected to change probably over the next year?
As we look forward, we have SROs, or law enforcement, in all of our elementary schools currently. And that's in cooperation with the Sheriff's Department and county government in terms of funding that. We've just completed interviewing firms to do a comprehensive security audit for our schools, which will be put into place shortly. We've set aside money in next year's budgets for any recommendations based upon that. And then we'll have a discussion with the county about where we go with continuing with elementary SROs. But if you go to our schools, the procedures have tightened up. A lot of things, you put procedures in place, you get comfortable, and they sort of slide back. I think we've done a good job of reinforcing those procedures. We're going to take the first part of next year as we come back into school and dedicate a couple days to drills, practice, training with our staff, so that we don't hit the summer and sort of just forget about what happened. We want to make sure we take whatever the lessons we've learned this spring and make sure they roll into the fall.
Absolutely, so parents can keep an eye on that.
Yes.
And watch as their children learn some new safety measures as well. One final question: in the era of college applications coming up and
that season,
and scholarships, we all hear that the NCAA continues to tighten academic regulations on our athletes. Are counselors taking any extra measures to make sure our student athletes are meeting those requirements and having everything ready so they can be opportunities for scholarships for them?
Well, our counselors will work with all of our students in terms of eligibility. And you have to remember, NCAA eligibility is going to be a little different maybe than the college eligibility. You may want to apply to a college and it requires this, but if you want to play NCAA sports, there may be one or two other requirements you have to meet to do that. You need to go to what's called the clearinghouse and register for the clearinghouse, look at the requirements and the eligibility rules, talk to your counselor about what that entails. They'll look at your transcript. Online courses sometimes will get flagged by the NCAA. We're fortunate that the ones through North Carolina Virtual Public School meet the NCAA requirements, but if you take an online programs to other people, they may be questioned about whether they meet those clearinghouse standards. So it's a conversation with your counselor. It's an early conversation with your counselor so that you can meet those standards. It's a privilege to play college sports. It's a great way to defer some of the cost if you have that talent. But you got to meet those requirements.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned, it's something you need to be proactive about.
Yes.
Don't wait till your junior year, but they need to really look into it as soon as they may see that as a possibility.
My son plays college ball, and we had to go through that whole clearinghouse process and really started looking at that sophomore year, junior year.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for all that information for our parents. Well, that wraps up this edition of UpFront. Look for a new edition of our program each month of the traditional school year right here on the Learning Network of the Cape Fear, Time Warner Cable Channel 5 and Charter Cable Channel 12. Once again, if you would like to have your questions on issues relating to our school system answered by Dr. Markley, then just go to our school system's website, www.nhcs.net, and there under the Superintendent's tab, you'll find an easy link for you to submit your questions. Now you can use the traditional mail as well and send your questions to New Hanover County Schools. Attention UpFront, 6410 Carolina Beach Road, Wilmington, North Carolina, 28412. On behalf of Dr. Markley and the staff here at NHCS TV, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next month for another edition of UpFront with the Superintendent.